When I finished Tales of Arise, then played Final Fantasy 16, I couldn't shake one thought. Tales of Arise is everything I wanted Final Fantasy 16 to be. On the surface, these two games have a lot in common. They're both action RPGs with stories about oppression, revenge, and fighting powerful beings, but the way they execute those themes couldn't feel more different. At the core of both narratives lies the idea of freedom versus oppression. Final Fantasy 16 uses slavery and domination as narrative themes, but in a way that often feels more symbolic than believable. In Final Fantasy 16, many of the oppressed people are the magic users, the bearers and the dominants who can channel icons. This is where the logic falls apart for me. We are told these people are the lowest of the low, treated like cattle and discarded when they turn to stone from magic overuse. Yet there are the same people who could literally conjure fire from their fingertips or transform into mountain-sized gods. The game asks me to believe that a society of normal humans has successfully enslaved a population of walking nukes for centuries without a massive continent-wide revolt. These people can literally conjure fire and ice out of thin air. They are walking, breathing weapons. Yet the game expects me to believe that non-magical populace has successfully kept them in shackles for centuries through mere social stigma? While I understand the blight is a factor, the disconnect makes the slavery subplot feel more like a visual or emotional imagery to evoke a Game of Thrones vibe, rather than something that logically flows from the world's rules. It pulls me out of the story instead of drawing me in, because I'm constantly asking, why don't they just burn the palace down? Yet Tales of Arise makes that conflict logically satisfying in a way Final Fantasy 16 doesn't. In Arise, the world is literally divided between two planets, technologically advanced Rena, whose people rule over Dana, and the conquered Danan populace, who have been enslaved and denied access to magic for centuries. The Renans use magic or astral energy as a tool of oppression. The hierarchy is visible and systematic. The Renan lords compete in a crown contest to see who can harvest the most energy from their respective Danan territories. This creates a tangible reason for the world to look and feel the way it does. Each region represents a different flavor of tyranny, from the literal labor camps of Calaglia to the insidious psychological manipulation in Menancia. Because the Danans are fundamentally stripped of the power to fight back, their eventual rebellion, fueled by Alphen's unique immunity to pain and Shionne's thorns, feels like a hard-fought, logical necessity. Another area where Arise consistently impressed me was how well it made me care about the characters and their relationships. Alphen's dynamic with Shionne isn't just a romance trope, it's a relationship that breathes. They start in a state of mutual necessity. He can't feel pain, and she causes pain to anyone who touches her through her thorns. This isn't just a neat plot device, it is the foundation of their entire emotional arc. In Arise, the physical barrier between them serves as a perfect metaphor for their emotional journey. Shionne is prickly, elitist, and terrified of intimacy because her very existence hurts people. Alphen, being the only person who literally cannot feel her curse, is the only one who can truly stand by her side. This creates a fascinating tension. They must work together to achieve their goals, but they are diametrically opposed in personality. They fight, they clash, they challenge each other's prejudices. Alphen challenges Shionne's Renan superiority, and Shionne challenges Alphen's naive idealism. The script allows these moments to sit and fester until the eventual growth feels earned through fire and blood. When they finally do connect, it carries a weight that feels like a hard-won victory. Meanwhile, in Final Fantasy 16, I felt a profound sense of loneliness regarding the central romance. The bond between Clive and Jill is meant to be the heart of the story, but it never landed for me. My biggest issue is that Jill, despite being the dominant of Shiva, a literal goddess of ice, often feels relegated to the background. She spends the majority of the game standing 2 steps behind Clive, agreeing with whatever he says and acting as a moral support beam rather than a character with her own agency. In Arise, Shion is a powerhouse. She is the party's primary healer and a deadly long-range combatant. The game literally cannot function without her. In Final Fantasy XVI, Jo often feels refrigerated. Once her initial revenge arc against the Iron Kingdom is finished, her character development effectively stops. There's a jarring moment where she literally gives her powers to Clive, further diminishing her presence in the narrative. Their bond lacks the organic friction and growth I found in Alphen and Shion. In Final Fantasy XVI, it felt like I was watching a movie about a lone hero and his loyal companion. In Arise, it felt like a partnership between equals who are both fundamentally changed by each other's presence. But it's not just the leads. The entire party, Law, Renwell, Kisara, and Dohalim, it feels like a cohesive unit. The skits in Arise are the secret sauce here. Some might find them frequent and annoying, but for me, they are essential to the narrative. They allow the characters to discuss the mundane, what they're eating, how they feel about the previous battle, or their internal conflicts regarding their heritage. By the time I reached the final act, I felt like I was traveling with a family. The emotional payoff in Arise felt so much heavier because the game took time to show the characters just living together. In Final Fantasy XVI, aside from Cid, who I must mention is one of the truly best Cid characters in the series, but besides from Cid and Clive's ridiculously awful mother, most of the cast doesn't make me care as deeply. In Final Fantasy XVI, the story is cinematic and grand, but the depth of connection between the party members is thin. When you're at the hideaway, it feels like Clive is the only person actually doing anything, while everyone else is literally just an NPC waiting for him to return. The party, a staple aspect of JRPGs, is virtually non-existent, leaving the journey feeling lonely rather than epic. This also ties into how both games handle combat and bosses. One of my biggest frustrations with Final Fantasy XVI is that many of the epic fights felt more like glorified QuickTime events stretched over 10 to 20 minutes of cinematic spectacle. Don't get me wrong, the fight against Bahamut is one of the most visually stunning things I've ever seen in a video game, but as a player, I felt like I was barely involved. I was pushing a button to trigger a cutscene where 2 gods hit each other. The regular combat in 16 also suffers from a lack of variety. Once you find a solid rotation of icon abilities, you can pretty much steamroll every encounter. There is no elemental weaknesses system, no status ailments to worry about, and no reason to change your strategy. Conversely, in Tales of Arise, bosses require you to learn patterns and engage with the mechanics in a real way. The boost strike system is genius because it forces you to use your specific party members strategically. Need to ground a flying enemy? Call in Shion. Need to break a heavily armored guard? Call in Law. This makes the party feel useful even when you aren't controlling them. It feels rewarding and keeps combat exciting because you're constantly reacting to the enemy's state. Now, this isn't to say Arise is perfect. The enemy variety can feel thin outside of major encounters, and a few bosses in the late game can feel like damaged sponges that drag longer than they need to. But the fundamental approach, teaching you the game's systems and making boss battles a culmination of that learning, is something I appreciated much more than the extended passive sequences in Final Fantasy XVI. When it comes to world design, whether aesthetically or their open zone approaches, Tales of Arise again just feels more inspired. Every region has its own identity and lore. When you move from the fiery wastes of Calaglia to the lush greens of Eld Mencia, the shift is visceral. You can feel the change in culture, the architecture, and the struggle of the people. The game rarely shoehorns you into filler errands that grind the story to a halt. Even the optional content usually rewards you with meaningful character interactions or lore. In contrast, Final Fantasy XVI has some of the worst pacing I've experienced in a modern RPG. There are moments where the story is firing on all cylinders, then suddenly the game forces me to do fetch tasks that feels like they were ripped out of Final Fantasy XIV. I'm thinking specifically of the mid-game slump, where you're forced to do desert fetch tasks or gather ship parts, while I'll gladly do for mid. But these moments felt tacked on and completely unrelated to the narrative momentum. It's actually jarring. You'll have a world-shattering event happen, then the game says, wait, go talk to these 3 people about some wood planks. And honestly, that kind of padding made me almost quit the game entirely because it broke the pacing and treated the player like a delivery NPC instead of the first shield of Rosaria. For a game that wants to be a mature, fast-paced action epic, it sure does spend a lot of time making you do chores. Arise feels like a brisk trek through a changing world, while 16 often feels like a series of magnificent movies separated by hours of walking through empty, albeit beautiful, corridors. One thing I will say, Final Fantasy XVI leans hard into its dark fantasy. I actually like that aesthetic. The grim, mature tone and the emotional moments work on a surface level. It feels like a prestige project, but the storytelling often drags it down because it refuses to let any light in. I kept thinking, if this were 20 hours instead of 50 hours, it'd be a masterpiece because the game is so relentlessly dark and the pacing is so uneven, the big moments start to lose their impact. Arise, on the other hand, keeps the story moving with humor, camaraderie, and the classic Tales skits that break up the tension. This doesn't make the story childish. In fact, Arise deals with some incredibly dark themes like genocide, suicide, and systematic torture, but because it allows the characters to have moments of levity like debating over a recipe or teasing each other over their hobbies, the dark moments hit harder. You care about the world because you see it's worth saving. Arise balances serious themes with lighter character moments, making the journey feel more human and less like a relentless march toward doom. For me, the most emotional effective part of Final Fantasy XVI was its intent. The themes of trauma, loss, and revenge are genuinely compelling, but its execution sometimes get lost under cinematic spectacle and pacing issues. Arise's emotional weight, by contrast, comes from steadily building relationships and letting you feel each moment because you're with the characters, not just watching them. Now, to be fair, Final Fantasy XVI excels in areas Arise doesn't. Its presentation is peerless. Its music is some of the best in the industry. Some fans love that cinematic style. It's Final Fantasy in a way that's distinctly its own. But for me, personally, that style never fully connected with my heart the way Tales of Arise's story and characters did. When I look at these 2 games side by side, Arise wins for me because it gives me a world that makes sense, characters I care about, combat that feels earned, and storytelling that respects my time and emotional investment. Final Fantasy XVI has ambition and spectacle, and I can appreciate that. But what I wanted from a next-gen JRPG experience, thoughtful world building, believable stakes, deep character growth, and rewarding gameplay. Tales of Arise delivered in a way Final Fantasy XVI just didn't.